Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. The note started because of the rotating shifts. I work freight logistics, shift supervisor at a regional terminal, and the schedule runs on a 3-week rotation that cycles through days, evenings, and nights in a sequence that sounds manageable in theory and is genuinely disorienting in practice. Your body never fully commits to a sleep schedule. Your sense of what day it is becomes approximate rather than exact. You develop systems. My system was notes. Nothing elaborate. A sticky note on the coffee maker telling me what time I needed to leave. A note on the bathroom mirror with whatever I needed to remember for that particular shift. One on the front door with anything critical. The kind of thing that, if I forgot it, the day got harder. I'd been doing it for about 3 years, and it worked well enough that I'd stopped questioning it. The notes were just part of the apartment, like the furniture. My name is Wren. I'm 34 and I live alone in a second-floor apartment in a mid-sized city that I've never fully decided whether I like. The terminal is 20 minutes south on the highway. The job is fine. I'm good at it. And it pays well. And the people I supervise are mostly reasonable, which in freight logistics is about as good as it gets. The first note I didn't write showed up on a Thursday. I came off a night shift at 6 in the morning and let myself into the apartment and went straight for the coffee maker the way I always do, running on the specific momentum of someone who has been awake since 10 the previous evening and is operating on the fumes of professionalism. There was a note on the coffee maker. This was not unusual. What was on the note was unusual. My handwriting, my exact handwriting, the particular tilt of my letters, and the way I make my lowercase e. It said that my supervisor, Dylan, was going to ask me to cover a Saturday morning slot that I'd been specifically trying to keep free, and that I should say no before he could frame it as a favor. That was all. Practical, specific, in my handwriting, and I had absolutely no memory of writing it. I stood at the coffee maker and looked at it. I thought about the last 20 hours and tried to find a pocket of time where I might have written a note and then blanked on it. There wasn't one. I'd been at the terminal since 10, covered the full shift, driven home. No stops, no detours, no lost stretches of time. I filed it under exhaustion and went to sleep. Dylan called at 2 in the afternoon and asked me to cover Saturday morning. I said no before he could frame it as anything, and he sounded slightly surprised in the way of someone whose script had skipped a step. I stood in my kitchen after I hung up and looked at the note again. The second note was on the bathroom mirror, 4 days later. This one described a specific car trouble I was going to have in the terminal parking lot after my shift. A battery that was going to hesitate on the first start and die on the second. It suggested I ask Sable, my best work friend and the outbound coordinator, to wait with me because she'd know to call a specific roadside service that had a contract with the terminal and could get to me in 20 minutes. I came off that shift, got in my car, turned the key, and felt the engine hesitate, the way a battery feels when it's almost gone. I asked Sable to wait. The battery died on the second start. We called the service. 20 minutes. Sable said while we were waiting. "You don't seem surprised." I told her I'd been having a weird week. She looked at me for a moment in the particular way she has, direct and without judgment, and said if I wanted to talk about it, she had time. I said, maybe later, which is what I say when I mean I'm not ready. The third note was under my coffee mug. Not on it, under it, which meant it had been placed there before the mug was set down, which meant either I'd put it there myself with the mug on top and had no memory of doing it, or something else had. This one described my full Thursday in detail. Not just a warning or a suggestion, a schedule. What I'd do and when, from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to work. It was accurate to a degree that I only understood looking back at the end of the day, when I'd done almost everything on it without trying to, because the day had simply arranged itself that way. Almost everything. There was one item I hadn't done. Near the bottom of the note, it said I should drive past the decommissioned freight yard on the south end of the terminal property on my way in. I hadn't, because I had no reason to, and it was slightly out of my way, and the note had unsettled me enough that I was beginning to push back against it in small, unconscious ways. I sat with all three notes on my kitchen table that night and looked at them together. My handwriting, accurate information, written before the events they described, and one of them had been placed somewhere that required the mug to be moved, which I either didn't remember doing or hadn't done. I thought about the obvious conclusion and let myself think about it all the way through rather than stopping at the comfortable edge of it. The notes were coming from somewhere ahead of me, not predictions, records. Someone who'd already lived these days was sending the account of them back. The handwriting was mine, because the someone was me. I didn't sleep well that night either. I started leaving my own notes again, but differently. I dated them. I noted the exact time I wrote them and exactly where I put them, and I kept a running account in my phone of every note I'd left so I could cross-reference. The fourth note appeared inside my locked truck, not on the seat. In the glove box, which I'd opened looking for my insurance card, folded neatly on top of the documents inside. This one didn't describe a day. It told me to drive past the decommissioned yard that night after my shift. Just that, no reason given, underlined once. I drove past it. I didn't stop. I drove past slowly and looked at the chain link fence and the dark structures beyond it, and the way the terminal's perimeter lights didn't quite reach the back of that property, and I felt nothing specific except the low-grade unease that had been my constant companion for 2 weeks. I drove home and wrote in my phone that I'd driven past it because I was documenting everything now. The fifth note was beneath my pillow. I found it when I changed my pillowcase. My handwriting again, slightly different this time, the letters more compressed, the tilt sharper, like the same hand writing under pressure or in poor light. It said the yard, tonight, come alone. The word alone was underlined twice. I stared at it for a long time. Then I took it to Sable. I showed her everything. All 5 notes, my phone log, the cross-reference. Sable listened and looked at what I showed her and asked 2 clarifying questions, and then sat quietly for a moment, doing what I've always admired about her, which is thinking before she responds. She said the handwriting on the 5th note looked like mine, but not exactly like mine. I said I knew. She said the slight differences were consistent across the 5th note, like a quality of the handwriting rather than a mistake. I said I knew that too. She asked me if I was going to go to the yard. I told her I was going to go to the yard, but not because the note said to. I was going because I was done waiting for information to come to me in pieces, and I wanted to find the source. Sable said she'd go with me. I told her no. I said I meant that in a genuine way and not a dismissive one. I said I thought this was specifically mine to handle, and I didn't want to pull someone I cared about into the part of it that I couldn't predict. She looked at me for a long moment and then nodded. She said she'd be available by phone and that if she didn't hear from me within 2 hours, she was calling the terminal security office, which was a reasonable compromise and one I accepted. I drove to the decommissioned yard after my shift on a Tuesday night. The gate had a padlock that the maintenance crew had not changed since the yard went offline, and I knew the code because I'd had it when the yard was active, and codes at our terminal don't get updated with the urgency they should. I'm not going to say it was the right decision to enter. I'm saying it's what I did. The yard had 2 structures, a small office building that had been emptied and locked up, and a long equipment shed that ran the width of the back of the property. The shed was what the perimeter lights didn't reach. I had a flashlight, and I used it. There was a wrongness around the shed that I want to describe carefully because I don't want to oversell it. It wasn't visible. It wasn't a sound. It was more like the feeling of a room where the temperature is slightly off, where your body registers a difference before your brain has named it. A subtle displacement in the air around the south wall of the shed, as if the space there had a slightly different relationship to everything around it than physics usually allowed. I stood in front of that wall for a moment. Then the door at the end of the shed opened and she came out. She looked like me. She was me in the way that matters. Same face, same height, same hands. But the 3 days that sat between us showed, not as age or injury, as a quality of having been somewhere difficult for longer than a person is built to stay. Her eyes were the same as mine, but they'd been doing something I hadn't been doing, and whatever it was had worn them down. She looked at me the way I'd look at something I'd been waiting a long time to see. She said my name, my full name, the one almost nobody uses. And the way she said it was exactly how I say it in my own head, because of course it was. I didn't speak. She said she knew I was hesitant and that she understood why, but that I needed to listen to her because what was going to happen in 3 days was something she'd already lived through, and it was survivable only if I did it differently than she had. She said the notes had been leading to this, to her, to the specific information she needed to give me so I could make the right choice. I asked her what the choice was. She said she'd tell me once I came closer, because speaking across the distance was difficult from her side. I didn't move closer. She stopped for a moment. Then she said she knew I didn't fully trust her, and she understood that, but that she was me, which meant she knew everything I knew, and she could prove it. She said my mother's name. She said the name of the street I grew up on. She said the name I'd given to the stuffed animal I'd slept with until I was 9, and that I'd never told a living person. I said I knew she knew all of that. I said that wasn't the question. I asked her what the 3 days had been like. She was quiet. I said she'd been in that yard for 3 days, or in whatever space existed between that wall and wherever she'd come from, and I wanted to know what 3 days in a collapsing thread did to a person. She said it was difficult. I said she'd been sending me notes that got increasingly coercive, that the first 2 had been useful information and the last 3 had been instructions. I said there was a difference between helping someone and steering them, and the notes had crossed that line by the 3rd one. Her expression shifted in a way I recognized because it was one I make. It was the expression I make when I know I've been caught doing something I justified to myself at the time. She said the situation had become more urgent as the days passed and the membrane deteriorated, and the urgency had changed how she was communicating. She said she was sorry. I said I heard that. I said I also noticed that everything she'd sent me had been moving me toward her, toward this yard, towards this conversation, and I wanted to know what she wanted from it. She said she wanted to come back through. I said I understood that. She said it in a way that carried the full weight of 3 days in a place that was coming apart around her, and I heard that weight. And I want to be honest about the fact that it was not easy to stand in front of my own face and my own voice saying that and hold the line I was holding. I said there wasn't a version of that which worked for both of us. I said I knew she knew that. She said she did. We stood there for a moment, both of us knowing what I knew and what she knew, which was the same thing. I said I was sorry. I meant it. Then I said I was going to close the membrane from my side, and I asked if there was anything she wanted me to know before I did. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said the thing that was going to happen in 3 days wasn't as bad as she'd been leading me to believe. She said she'd exaggerated it to create urgency. She said it was just a bad day, not a catastrophe, just the kind of bad day that a person gets through and then moves past. I said I figured. She said she was sorry for the notes, the demanding ones. I told her I'd have done the same thing. She said she knew. I closed the membrane. I won't describe exactly what that involved because I'm not sure I could accurately, and I'm also not sure it matters. What matters is that the wrongness in the air around the south wall of the shed went away cleanly, the way a sound stops, and she went with it. I stood in the dark freight yard for a while after that. Then I called Sable and told her I was fine and I was heading home. She asked one question and I answered it honestly, which was that I'd handled it. She said okay, and that she'd want the full story eventually. I said she'd get it. The note stopped. I went back to my regular habit: coffee maker, bathroom mirror, front door, dated and timed and cross-referenced, because that was now simply how I did it. The rotating shifts kept rotating. Dylan kept making requests I kept managing. The battery I'd replaced after the parking lot incident held fine through the rest of the winter. 3 weeks after the freight yard, I came into the kitchen on a morning after a night shift, running on fumes the way I always do after nights, reached for the coffee maker and stopped. There was a note on it, my handwriting. I stood in front of it for a long time. The first line described a day that hadn't happened yet. Specific, accurate feeling, the same quality as the earlier notes. Below the first line there was more. I could see there was more without reading it. I thought about the other me in the freight yard, the 3 days worn into her eyes, the way she'd looked when she admitted she'd exaggerated the urgency to steer me. I thought about the notes shifting from useful to directive to coercive, and how gradually that had happened, how reasonable each step had seemed from inside it. I picked up the note and held it, and didn't read past the first line. Then I folded it once and put it in the trash and made my coffee. Whatever the rest of it said, I didn't want to know. Information that arrives before you've lived the day it belongs to has a cost I'd already paid once. I wasn't going to pay it again. I made my coffee and took it to the kitchen table and sat with my back to the interior wall, which is a habit I've kept from someone else's advice, and I drank it while the morning came through the window. I went to work. I had a bad day. Not a catastrophic one, just the kind you get through and move past. She'd been right about that at least. I got through it.